Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Case and Remy's phone buzzed against the glass surface of his standing desk. The number showed Oregon area code, but he didn't recognize it. In his Denver office, surrounded by 3 monitors displaying code repositories and investment portfolios, he let it ring twice more before answering. Case and Remy. Cason? Oh, thank God you picked up. This is Marla. Marla Greeley? Your cousin. He paused, fingers stopping their movement across the keyboard. Marla. He hadn't heard that voice in over a decade. Not since the funeral. The voice sounded older now, strained. What do you want, Marla? It's your father, Sherwin. He collapsed this morning. Cardiac arrest. We don't know if he's going to make it. Cason minimized his trading interface and pulled up a notepad application. He started typing as she spoke, documenting the call in real time. Where did this happen? At home. He was reading the paper, and Silas found him on the kitchen floor. The paramedics said his heart stopped for almost 3 minutes. Prognosis? The doctors are running tests, but they're not optimistic. Cason, I know you two haven't spoken since. Well, since your mother passed. But he's been asking for you. Maybe this is a chance to make peace. Cason noted the emotional manipulation in her tone, the careful pause, the reference to his mother, the implication of deathbed reconciliation. Classic Remy family strategy. Has he regained consciousness? He's in and out, but when he's awake, he keeps saying your name. I think he has things he wants to tell you. Cason's expression didn't change. He saved his work with 2 quick keystrokes and minimized the screen. Through his office window, Denver sprawled below him, organized and predictable. Unlike family. Is he conscious? The doctors, they're saying it's touch and go. Cason, I know you two haven't spoken, but he's been asking for you. Maybe this is a chance to. Where is he? Black Ridge General. But Cason, there's something else. The family trust, the one tied to your mother's estate? There are some issues that need addressing. Legal stuff. If something happens to Sherwin, Cason leaned back in his chair. There it was. The hook beneath the bait. I'll be there tonight. Really? Oh, Cason, that's wonderful. The family will be so. He hung up and stared at the phone. Sherwin Remy, master manipulator, supposedly at death's door. Cason had built his entire adult life around systems and logic. People said one thing and meant another. They claimed emergencies when they wanted leverage. They used guilt when they needed compliance. But the mention of his mother's estate changed things. That money had rules, contracts, legal frameworks that even Sherwin couldn't easily manipulate. If they were calling about it now, they needed something from him. Something important enough to risk breaking more than 10 years of silence. Cason opened his laptop and booked the earliest flight to Portland. The rental car navigated the winding roads toward Black Ridge as afternoon light filtered through Douglas fir trees. Cason had forgotten how the timber money showed itself here in the size of the houses, the width of the driveways, the way property stretched between neighbors like small kingdoms. The Remy house sat at the end of a quarter-mile gravel drive, 2 stories of dark wood and stone that had housed 3 generations of timber wealth. Cason parked next to a rusted pickup truck and a Honda Civic that had seen better years. He didn't knock. The front door opened as he approached. Cason. Sherwin Remy stood in the doorway, holding a folded newspaper. His gray hair was combed, his flannel shirt pressed, color in his cheeks, steady on his feet. You look good for someone who nearly died this morning. Sherwin's mouth twitched. Doctors exaggerated. You know how they are. Everything's a crisis until the insurance company asks questions. They stood there, father and son, measuring each other across 10 years of silence. Sherwin stepped aside. Come in. The others are here. The house smelled like coffee and old wood. Cason followed his father through the living room, past furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Photos lined the mantle family gatherings, timber operations, civic awards. None included Cason that eye in the kitchen. 3 people looked up from around a large oak table. Cason. Marla Greeley rose from her chair, arms extended. She was 40-something now, softer around the edges, but with the same calculating eyes he remembered. I'm so glad you came. She hugged him. He didn't return it. Marla, you remember your brother Silas. Silas Remy nodded from his position against the counter. He'd grown heavier, his hands stained with engine grease despite being indoors. The kind of man who wore work clothes to family dinners because he wanted people to remember he had a job. Little brother. Silas's voice carried an edge. Heard you're doing well up in Colorado. Computer stuff. Something like that. The third person cleared her throat. Clove Remy, his father's sister, sat primly at the head of the table. She wore a floral dress and a cross necklace that caught the kitchen light. Kaysen, dear, the Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing family together in times of trial. Trial? Sherwin poured coffee into a mug and set it in front of an empty chair. Sit. We have things to discuss. Kaysen remained standing. You called me here because you were dying. You're not dying. So what do you actually want? The room went quiet. Marla's smile faltered. Silas shifted against the counter. Clove folded her hands. Your father's health scare reminded us all how precious time is. How important it is to have family affairs in order. Affairs. Legal matters, Marla said quickly. Estate planning. Your mother's trust has some complications. Kaysen pulled out the chair and sat. What kind of complications? Sherwin took the seat across from him. The kind that require family unity. The kind that get expensive if we don't handle them properly. For the next hour, they talked around the issue. Marla asked about his apartment in Denver, whether he was seeing anyone, if he missed the mountains. Her questions felt rehearsed, like she'd prepared talking points for a difficult client meeting. So you're doing well for yourself, she said. I heard you bought a house in one of those expensive neighborhoods. I rent an apartment. Oh, well, I'm sure it's nice. You always were the smart one in the family. Silas snorted, smart enough to run away when things got tough. Silas, Clove warned. What? It's true. Soon as Mom died, he disappeared. Left the rest of us to deal with everything. Kaysen studied his brother. Silas had gained weight around the middle. His hands showed the permanent stains of someone who worked with engines, and his eyes carried the look of a man who'd made too many bad decisions. What exactly did you have to deal with? Kaysen asked. The funeral arrangements. The estate paperwork. Dad's business problems. All of it. Business problems. Sherwin cleared his throat. Nothing dramatic. Market fluctuations. Regulatory changes. The timber industry isn't what it used to be. Marla's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face tightened before she forced another smile. The Lord provides for those who trust in his plan, Clove said, apparently to no one in particular. Though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, yet unfailing love will not be shaken. Isaiah, Kaysen asked. He checked his calendar app, scrolling back 5 years to the date on the release form. March 15th. He'd been in a board meeting in Denver that day, presenting quarterly projections to investors. He had email records, calendar confirmations, and hotel receipts from that entire week. Dorothy, he called. Who's the notary on this document? Margaret Finley. Dorothy looked up the name in her system. Oh, Maggie. She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. When exactly? Let me check. April 2022. Sweet lady. She'd been notarizing documents in this county for 40 years. Kaysen printed everything. The release form, the modified will, the property transfers, the loan documents. 93 pages at 10 cents each. He paid in cash and carried the stack to his CARDI in the coffee shop parking lot. He called Tori. They forged my signature on a release form, he said without preamble. Can you prove it? I can prove I was in Denver on the date it was supposedly witnessed. I can prove I haven't been back to Oregon in 10 years. And I can prove the notary listed on the form died 3 years ago, which means she couldn't have notarized anything after 2022. Tori was quiet for a moment. This is criminal fraud, Kaysen. Multiple felonies. There's more. Kaysen read through the property records. Silas borrowed against land he didn't own, using a power of attorney that may not have been valid. Clove has been moving church funds through accounts she doesn't have authority to access. And Sherwin has been restructuring the trust to avoid the new tax law. How much money are we talking about? Kaysen scanned the financial documents. Conservative estimate? The trust is worth $12 million. The debt obligations they've created total about $8 million. If their scheme worked, they'd have $4 million in clear assets. If it fails, they're looking at personal bankruptcy and potential jail time. Kaysen paid for copies of everything and drove to the only coffee shop in town that had reliable internet. He called Tori from the parking lot. "They forged my signature on a release form," he said without preamble. "Can you prove it?" "I can prove I was in Denver on the date it was supposedly witnessed. I can prove I haven't been back to Oregon in 10 years. And I can prove the notary listed on the form has been dead for 3 years." Tori was quiet for a moment. "Jesus, Kaysen, this is criminal fraud. Multiple felonies. It gets better. They're trying to get me to sign documents that would transfer the entire trust to them and make me liable for their debts, all while operating under an expired power of attorney." Expired how? Clove's authority to act on Sherwin's behalf ran out 2 weeks ago. Anything she's done since then is illegal. So the medical emergency was fake. The medical emergency was bait. They needed me back here to sign documents before someone noticed the forgery or the expired authority. They're running out of time because of the new tax law. Tori's voice carried the tone he used in court when he was about to destroy someone. "What do you want to do?" "I want to map their entire operation before I move. Can you draft a civil asset freeze? But don't file it yet. Give me 2 hours." Kaysen ended the call and opened his laptop. Time for reconnaissance. He spent the afternoon visiting local businesses, asking casual questions about the Remy family. Small towns love to gossip, and the Remys have provided plenty of material lately. The hardware store. The owner mentioned that Silas hadn't paid his account in 6 months. Shame, really. He's good people, just got in over his head with that trucking thing. The bank manager, who remembered Kaysen from high school, was more direct. "Your brother's situation is complicated," he said, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Between you and me, he's looking at bankruptcy if he can't make something happen soon." The trucking business was a disaster from day one. Wrong permits, inadequate insurance, drivers who didn't know local roads. He lost 3 contracts in the first month. "How much does he owe?" "I can't give you specifics, but let's say it's more than the collateral is worth. And that's before considering the liens." At the post office, the clerk mentioned that Clove had been receiving certified mail from lawyers for weeks. "She always looks so worried when she picks them up. Poor thing." The pastor at Clove's church was more diplomatic, but the message was clear when Kaysen caught him after the afternoon service. "Mr. Remy, I'm glad to see you back in town. Your Aunt Clove speaks of you often." "I'm sure she does. I heard there might be some concerns about the building fund." Pastor Williams' smile tightened. "We're conducting an internal review of our financial management procedures. Sometimes good people make poor choices under financial pressure. The church board is working to ensure all funds are properly accounted for." "How much is missing?" "I can't discuss specific amounts, but we're confident everything will be resolved through proper channels." Translation: significant money was gone, and they were trying to handle it quietly to avoid scandal. The tax assessor's office revealed that Sherwin had been fighting property valuations for months, filing appeals and requesting reassessments. The clerk, a young woman who seemed eager to help, pulled up the records on her computer. "Your father's been very active with valuations lately," she said. "Usually people fight assessments when they think they're too high, but he's been arguing that some properties should be valued higher." "Higher?" "Yeah, it's unusual. Higher valuations mean higher taxes. But he's been providing documentation showing increased timber yields and property improvements." That didn't make sense until Kaysen remembered the new inheritance tax law. Sherwin wasn't trying to reduce current taxes, he was trying to establish higher baseline values, so the eventual inheritance calculations would show smaller gains, reducing the overall tax burden when assets transferred. Clever, if you were planning to die soon. Or if you were planning to transfer assets before the law took effect. By evening, Kaysen had a complete picture of their desperation. His family wasn't just in financial trouble, they were cornered with nowhere to run. Silas faced bankruptcy and possible criminal charges for fraudulent loan applications. Clove was looking at embezzlement charges from a church. Sherwin was racing against time to restructure everything before the new tax law made their debt load impossible to manage. And they needed Kaysen's signature to make any of it work. He drove back to the house as the sun set through the trees, thinking about cornered animals and the dangerous things they did when escape seemed impossible. By evening, Kaysen had a complete picture. His family wasn't just desperate, they were cornered. And cornered people did desperate things. He drove back to the house as the sun set through the trees. Dinner was quieter than the night before. The family seemed to be waiting for something, watching Kaysen for signs of decision. He gave them nothing, eating methodically and responding to small talk with neutral politeness. "Did you have a chance to review those documents?" Marla asked as she served coffee. "I did. Any questions?" "A few. Nothing major." Relief flickered across her face. "Good. We can address anything you're unclear about." "Actually," Kaysen said, "I was curious about the land parcel disputes I've been hearing about. Boundary changes can create extra taxation issues." Silas's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "What disputes?" "The ones affecting the northern parcels. I heard there might be boundary adjustments that could trigger reassessment." Silas's face went pale. Nobody mentioned. It's probably nothing," Kaysen said mildly. "Just something I heard in town." But Silas was sweating now, clearly calculating tax implications he hadn't considered. Kaysen filed the reaction away and moved to his next target. "Marla, I was wondering about Clove power of attorney. Does that cover all trust decisions, or are there limits?" "Oh, it covers everything," Marla said quickly. Sherwin made sure it was comprehensive. "When was it executed?" 2 years ago. "Very thorough." The lawyers made sure. "But it has an expiration date, right?" "Most powers of attorney do." Marla's smile faltered. "Well, it expired 2 weeks ago, technically, but we're still operating under the assumption." "The assumption of what?" Clove cleared her throat. "That family business should be handled by family, regardless of legal technicalities. Technicalities like having legal authority to act." The room went dead silent. Sherwin set down his coffee cup. "Kaysen, what exactly are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that expired powers of attorney don't create assumptions. They create legal liabilities." Silas stood up abruptly. "Look, this is all lawyer bullshit. We're family. We take care of each other. That's how it's supposed to work." "Is that how it worked when Mom was dying?" The words hit the table like a physical blow. Clove gasped. Marla's face went white. "That's not fair," Sherwin said quietly. "Fair?" Kaysen's voice stayed level, controlled. "You let her deteriorate for months because you thought her symptoms were psychological. You refused to pay for specialists because you didn't trust doctors from Portland. She died from kidney failure that could have been treated if you'd acted 6 months earlier. And now you want to talk about family taking care of each other?" "That's ancient history," Clove said. "No, that's why I haven't been home in 10 years. That's why you had to fake a medical emergency to get me back. And that's why I'm going to make very sure I understand exactly what you're asking me to sign." Kaysen stood up from the table. "I'll have an answer for you tomorrow morning." He left them sitting in the kitchen and went upstairs to make phone calls. The first call was to Tori. "File the asset freeze first thing tomorrow morning. Make sure it covers all trust property and requires court approval for any transfers." The second call was to a number he'd found in the courthouse records. An investigator with the Oregon Department of Justice who specialized in estate fraud. "I'd like to report suspicious activity involving forged documents and illegal use of expired power of attorney," he said. "Can you prove it?" "I can prove all of it." The next morning, Kaysen made coffee in the kitchen while the rest of the family slept. He sat at the oak table with his laptop, reviewing email from Tori and putting the final touches on his strategy. Marla appeared first, already dressed and carrying a folder of documents. "Ready to get this finished?" she asked brightly. "Where's everyone else?" "Getting ready. We thought we'd handle the signing this morning, then maybe drive out to see the timber operation. You haven't seen how much it's grown." Silas came downstairs, hair still wet from the shower. "Morning. We doing this thing, or what?" Clove entered from the living room, Bible in hand. "Good morning, dear. I've been praying for wisdom and unity in our family business." Sherwin was last, carrying his own folder and wearing the expression Kaysen remembered from childhood negotiations. "Everyone ready?" Sherwin asked. "I am," Kaysen said. They gathered around the table. Marla spread the documents out with practiced efficiency. Clove positioned herself where she could watch Kaysen's face. Silas stood behind Sherwin's chair like a bodyguard. "You win," Kaysen said quietly. Relief flooded the room. Marla's smile became genuine. Clove clasped her hands together. "I'm glad you understand," Sherwin said. "This is what's best for everyone." Kaysen picked up the pen and signed the top document with clear, deliberate strokes. Marla swept the papers up immediately, checking the signature, organizing them for filing. "Perfect. This will make everything so much simpler." "I should hope so," Kaysen said as a car door slammed outside. Then another. Footsteps on the gravel driveway. Clove looked toward the window. "Are we expecting someone?" The doorbell rang. Sherwin frowned. "I'll get it." "Actually," Kaysen said, standing up, "I think that's for me." He walked to the front door and opened it. A woman in a business suit stood on the porch, flanked by two men in ties. "Mr. Remy? I'm Janet Morrison, Oregon Department of Justice. These are Agents Clark and Rodriguez. We're here about some documents you reported." Kaysen stepped aside. "Please come in." They entered the living room. The family followed, confusion and growing alarm on their faces. "What's this about?" Sherwin demanded. Agent Clark consulted his notes. "We're investigating reports of forged documents and illegal use of expired legal authority in estate matters." "Before anyone files anything," Kaysen said clearly, "you should know that those papers you just collected include a new clause transferring temporary conservatorship of the estate to me under a verified emergency protection provision. All prior documents are now invalid." The room exploded. "What?" Marla grabbed the documents, scanning them frantically. "That's impossible," Silas said. Clove started quoting scripture about deception and betrayal. "How?" Sherwin's voice was deadly quiet. "Simple," Kaysen said. "Your power of attorney expired 2 weeks ago, which means any authority to modify the trust was already void. Since you had no legal standing to make changes, the estate had no lawful representation. Under Oregon law, that creates an emergency condition requiring immediate court protection." He nodded toward Agent Clark. "The document I just signed was an emergency conservatorship petition that Tory filed with the court this morning. Because you're operating under expired authority, the court had no choice but to grant it." Morrison stepped forward. "We'll also need to examine all estate documents for the past 5 years. We have reports of forged signatures and fraudulent filings." Marla tried to run for the door. Agent Rodriguez stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay while we conduct our search." The search took 4 hours. The DOJ agents worked methodically through filing cabinets, computers, and safes, photographing documents and bagging evidence. They had warrants for everything: bank records, correspondence, computer files, even personal phones. Kaysen sat in the living room, watching his family realize the scope of their legal exposure. Sherwin maintained his composure, but Kaysen could see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to figure out how much evidence existed and where he might have left vulnerabilities. Silas paced like a caged animal, checking his phone constantly and muttering under his breath. Every time an agent emerged with another box of documents, his face went a shade paler. Clove sat rigidly in her chair, Bible open on her lap, lips moving in silent prayer. But her hands shook when she turned the pages. Marla was the first to break. Agent Rodriguez had found financial records in her car printouts showing transfers between the church building fund and personal accounts. When Morrison confronted her with the evidence, Marla's careful composure shattered. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was going to pay it back when the trust money came through. I just needed to cover some expenses." "What expenses?" Morrison asked, her voice professionally neutral. "Personal loans, credit cards, my daughter's college tuition. I got in over my head, and Clove said the church money was just sitting there earning nothing." Clove gasped from her chair. "I never said that. I never told you to take money from the church. You said God would provide. You said the building fund could wait if it meant keeping family together. You said that sometimes we have to make hard choices for the greater good. That's not what I meant, and you know it." But Morrison was taking notes, documenting the admission and the implied conspiracy between the two women that I and Sherwin study. The agents found more damaging evidence. bank records showing a pattern of asset transfers designed to avoid the new tax law, correspondence with lawyers about creative interpretations of estate law, and aggressive but defensible strategies for minimizing tax exposure. And in a locked drawer the one Sherwin probably thought was secure, they found copies of the original documents. The real will, with Kaysen's actual signature on the witness line. The forged release form in multiple drafts, showing the progression as someone practiced copying his handwriting. Even notes about timing, when to call Kaysen, how to stage the medical emergency, what emotional pressure points to use. This is premeditation, Agent Clark said, holding up the handwriting practice sheets. Someone spent considerable time preparing to forge these documents. The breakthrough came when Morrison's phone rang. The neighbor Kaysen had spoken to the day before a man named Ed Kowalski who lived down the road had arrived with his smartphone. "I recorded Silas bragging about this at Murphy's bar last week," Ed told Morrison. "He was drunk and talking loud about how he'd solved the family's money problems." They played the audio file on speakerphone. Silas's voice, slurred but clear, explaining how he'd forged Kaysen's signature because the little prince never comes home anyway, and how they were going to finally get what the family deserved. "We needed the land transfer to go through before the tax law changed," the recorded Silas continued. "Kaysen never answered calls, never came home. What were we supposed to do? Let the government steal everything. So I signed his name. Family business stays family business." The real Silas, sitting in the living room, put his head in his hands as his own voice incriminated him. "That's felony fraud," Agent Clark said. Recorded confession. By evening, the picture was complete and devastating. Sherwin faced criminal fraud charges, conspiracy to commit fraud, and tax evasion. He would lose all administrative control over the estate and face potential jail time despite his age. Marlowe was looking at embezzlement charges from both the family trust and the church, plus conspiracy charges related to the forged documents. The church was likely to pursue separate civil action for the stolen building fund money. Clove faced charges for conspiracy and abuse of power of attorney, plus potential charges related to her role in the church fund embezzlement. Her house was already mortgaged to pay for lawyers. Silas was charged with forgery, fraud, and making false statements to financial institutions. The recorded confession made his case essentially hopeless. Through it all, Kaysen remained emotionally detached, answering questions with precise factual responses and showing no reaction to his family's pleas for understanding or their increasingly desperate attempts to blame each other. Sherwin faced criminal fraud charges and loss of all administrative control over the estate. Marlowe was looking at embezzlement charges from both the family trust and the church. Clove faced charges for conspiracy and abuse of power of attorney. Silas was charged with forgery and fraud. Through it all, Kaysen remained emotionally detached, answering questions with precise factual responses and showing no reaction to his family's pleas for understanding. "You planned this," Sherwin said as they let him out in handcuffs. "You set us up." "No," Kaysen replied calmly. "You set yourselves up. I just documented it." The legal proceedings moved quickly once the evidence was compiled. With overwhelming documentation, recorded confessions, and multiple witnesses, plea bargains became the only viable option for Kaysen's family. Torrey handled the negotiations with clinical efficiency. "Your family's lawyers are recommending they take whatever deals the prosecutor offers," he told Kaysen during a video call. "The evidence is too strong to fight." Sherwin's attorney, a local lawyer named Davidson who specialized in timber industry disputes, was in over his head with federal fraud charges. During the preliminary hearing, he tried to argue that Sherwin's actions were aggressive but legal business practices and that the family had a reasonable expectation of Kaysen's cooperation. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Chun, destroyed that argument in 3 sentences. "Your Honor, the defendant forged documents, used an expired power of attorney, and attempted to defraud both his son and the state of Oregon. There was nothing reasonable about any of it." Sherwin pled guilty to fraud and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and permanent loss of authority over any family trusts. He would also be personally liable for restitution to the church and all legal costs associated with undoing the fraudulent transactions, that Marla's case was more complex because it involved both family and church money. She pled guilty to embezzlement and received 2 years probation, but the restitution requirements would haunt her for decades. The church was seeking $47,000 in missing building fund money, plus interest and legal fees. Her house went into foreclosure within 6 months. Clove lost everything. Her legal fees consumed the equity in her house, and she was banned from managing any religious organization funds. The conspiracy charges carried a suspended jail sentence that would activate if she violated any terms of her probation. She moved into a studio apartment above the town's only laundromat. Silas filed for bankruptcy, but the fraud charges meant his debts weren't dischargeable. His equipment was sold at auction to pay creditors, and his wages would be garnished for the next 15 years. The recorded confession made his case so clear-cut that he served 6 months in county jail as part of his plea agreement. During the proceedings, none of them spoke to Kaysen. Their lawyers had advised against any contact, and Kaysen made it clear through Tory that he had nothing to say to any of them. When a local reporter asked if he planned to help his family with their legal expenses, Kaysen's response was brief. They created these problems through their own choices. They can solve them the same way. The restructuring of the Remy Timber Trust took longer than the criminal proceedings. Kaysen worked with specialists in nonprofit law to create an organization that would serve the community rather than enriching individuals. The trust's assets, timberlands, investment accounts, and property holdings were transferred to the new structure with ironclad safeguards. The Remy Community Foundation would fund reforestation projects throughout Oregon, provide grants to small businesses in timber communities, and support environmental education programs. Board members would be elected by the communities that benefited from the grants, not appointed by family members. Most importantly, Kaysen implemented legal barriers, ensuring that no member of the Remy family could ever again manipulate the trust for personal benefit. The foundation's charter specifically prohibited family members from serving on the board, receiving grants, or having any control over the organization's activities. You're essentially disinheriting yourself along with them, Tory pointed out during the final document review. Good, Kaysen replied. The family name should earn its value through service, not inheritance. 6 months later, Kaysen stood in his Denver office, looking out at the mountain skyline. His phone rang another Oregon number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. The message was from a local newspaper reporter. Mr. Remy, I'm doing a story about the changes to the Remy Timber Trust and its impact on the community. Would you be willing to answer a few questions? Specifically, do you have any regrets about the legal actions that separated you from your family? Kaysen deleted the message without calling back, but the question stayed with him as he worked through the afternoon. Regrets implied that you cared about the outcome for the other parties. Regrets suggested emotional investment in relationships that had proven to be purely transactional. His family had taught him a valuable lesson about the difference between blood relations and actual loyalty. Blood might bind people together, but it didn't make them trustworthy. Legacy might create obligation, but it didn't create love. He had trimmed the rot from the family tree, and what remained was healthier for it. Later that evening, a second reporter called. This one was persistent enough to reach him directly. Mr. Remy, some people are saying you destroyed your family over money. Others say you saved a community trust for being looted. What's your perspective? Kaysen considered the question for a moment. Regret implies you care about the choices other people made. I didn't burn the family tree. I just trimmed the rot. He hung up and blocked the number. Outside his office windows, Denver glittered in the darkness, organized, predictable, honest in its ambitions. Unlike family, the city didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Kaysen returned to his work, building systems that functioned according to logic rather than sentiment, creating structures that rewarded merit rather than genetics. In Blackridge, the Remy Timber Trust continued its work, funding reforestation projects and supporting local businesses. The community benefited from the wealth 3 generations of Remys had accumulated. But the Remy family name carried a different weight, now not the weight of power and privilege, but the weight of consequence and accountability. And in his Denver office, Case and Remy worked late into the night, surrounded by systems he could trust, building a life that owed nothing to legacy and everything to merit. The family tree had been pruned. What grew from the remaining roots would have to prove its worth honestly, without the protection of blood or the shelter of inherited guilt. Kaysen had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to honor your family is to refuse to become them.